welcome to our virtual history tour of Southern Kenton County. This summer we are exploring the histories of houses, buildings, and landmarks south of I-275. Every other Wednesday we will post a new video highlighting an important location in Kenton County history. The videos will post to our Facebook group, Kenton Library Archives, and our YouTube channel. We will also have a special tour-related post on our Instagram account, Kenton Library Archives. Today we will be exploring the Dr. Caleb Manley House at 3227 Dixie Highway in Erlanger. This house has a storied history, and it's nestled within the Forest Lawn Memorial Park. The Northern Kentucky property that became the Caleb Manley House was first owned by Thomas Buckner, who purchased several hundred acres of a land grant in about 1831. And he built his home on another part of the property, which he called Beechwood. The history of this house officially begins in 1852 with Dr. Caleb Stone Manley, who built the home. And Caleb was born in 1797 to John and Tabitha Manley. A native of Virginia, he was married to Margaret Johnson, who was from Georgia, and they had two daughters, Octavia and Margaret. And the family lived in the South, spending time in Arkansas and Mississippi, and Caleb worked as a physician. Dr. Caleb Manley traveled with his wife and his daughters to the area, and the purpose of their trip was to leave Margaret at Nazareth, a Catholic school near Bardstown. Mrs. Manley kept a diary of this trip, and fragments of this diary survive. After dropping Margaret off at school, the family continued to venture up to the northern part of Kentucky, and as she described in her diary, Mrs. Manley said, "The doctor fell in love with this beautiful country below Cincinnati. He left me here and went to look at it. He offered a man $14,000 for a farm of 350 acres. So, Manley purchased the property from Thomas Buckner's son Hubbard a few years after his father's death in 1844. Manley built the current structure, and he's responsible for the configuration of the land in the way that it appears today. According to a 1938 newspaper article, the bricks that were used to build the home were made by slaves and were kilned on the grounds. Dr. Manley was very much interested in botany, and he designed the land, filling it with beautiful cypress, beech, and ginkgo trees. And he also brought many other trees and shrubs from the south. The Manley family did not remain in the house for long, only about 8 years before deciding to move into Covington. In the early 1860s, a few years before his death in 1866, Caleb Manley sold the property, and it was briefly owned by William H. Wilson and Asahel Hathaway before James P. Garvey, a Cincinnati businessman, purchased the property. Garvey was a prominent tobacco merchant in the area, and he made his fortune in this area of work. He was very influential in the community, and he and a neighbor, Dr. Charles Judkins, organized the Erlanger Land Syndicate, and this firm was responsible for much of the development of the town of Erlanger. He lived in the home with his wife and his 6 sons, and they also had 2 servants living with them, 2 girls, one aged 16, and the other was only 10 years of age. In March 1903, a few years after Garvey's death in 1896, the Kentucky Post referred to Miss Anna Bettinger, who had recently purchased the old Garvey homestead, and to celebrate the purchase of her new home, she entertained friends and family with a house party. And Anna seemed to be quite social, and she was always in the paper, either entertaining at her home or traveling to visit relatives and friends. And one of the events that she was recognized for was a New Year's dinner that she held to ring in the year 1904 at the home. And as July 1913 arrived, it was announced in the Cincinnati Enquirer that Colonel Thomas Richard Cody, also known as Tom Cody of Covington, recently purchased the old Garvey homestead from Anna Bettinger. After he purchased the home, he offered its use to the Protestant Children's Home of Madison Avenue in Covington, where Mrs. Waite and the children spent a 2-week vacation. Thomas Cody was born in 1865, and a native of Kenton County, he was born to Irish parents. He was known as one of Covington's most colorful figures at the time, and Mr. Cody owned a cafe at 3rd and Scott in Covington for a number of years, and he gained notice as a host and caterer, and he also managed a restaurant within the Cincinnati Zoo. He gained even more popularity when he transformed the Caleb Manley house and land into a restaurant and entertainment venue. It served as a community gathering place, a popular picnicking destination, and was famous for Cody's mint juleps and his burgoo recipe. Along with these items, barbecued lamb and broiled steaks were also regularly on the menu. And Cody was an ardent baseball fan, and many ball games were played in a field close to the house. The historic house was also celebrated in many writings, as it was the mansion on the hill in John Uri Lloyd's book, Stringtown on the Pike. It was reported that there were many notable visitors to the farm, including the mayor of New York, Jimmy Walker, and Jack Dempsey, who was a former world champion heavyweight boxer. Cody was a storyteller, and he would often entertain his guests by singing old-time ballads. And many local groups would hold outings here, including the Covington Lodge of Elks, who held their annual picnic there. The Covington Catholic High School Alumni Association held an annual banquet. And the Newport and Campbell County Medical Association, churches, and other community organizations regularly gathered at the Cody farm. July 12, 1935, after 22 years of ownership, it was announced that Colonel Tom Cody would sell his farm as the business was slowing down. As Cody sold the house, he auctioned off much of his personal property as well, and among items auctioned off were dining tables and chairs, a Victrola, some antiques, one pony and a cart, and garden tools. He also auctioned off one large Frigidaire, as the Kentucky Post stated, and the kettle that was used to make his famous burgoo. Cody died the year following the sale in 1936 at the age of 72. And the house and farm were sold to a group of investors, and this was headed by George Stetter, and the plan was announced 2 weeks later that it was to be converted into a cemetery. Articles of incorporation were signed at the Kenton County Clerk's office by a number of individuals, and George Stetter was from Bellevue, and he was a partner in the Vonderhaar Stetter Funeral Home. To be converted into a cemetery, there was a lot of work that needed to take place. So roads were replaced and new roads were built, and old slave buildings were raised. The home was converted to be utilized as the new cemetery offices. And along with founding the cemetery, George Stetter was president of the board of directors of Forest Lawn Memorial Park until his death in 1950. After his death, George's daughter, Thelma Stetter Owen, and her husband, James Owen, took over management of the cemetery. And they converted the second level of the home, and they lived there with their son, James Stetter Owen. In the mid-1950s, the home also served as exhibit space. The public was invited to the home to enjoy a display of various paintings. And along with managing, James Owen also served as the horticultural expert, having tulips imported from Holland to plant at the cemetery. He was proud of the over 5,000 tulips that were in bloom at the cemetery in the 1950s. And Mr. Owen died in 1961, and Thelma continued to manage the property. As her health began to decline, management transferred over to their son, James Stetter Owen, and his wife, Carol Boone Owen, in about 1976, and Thelma died in 1980. And again, the house has served as the office for the cemetery, and it also received recognition in 1990 as it was part of the Heroes and Houses Historic Home Tour, which was held in celebration of Kenton County's 150th birthday. And this combination walking and driving tour provided an opportunity for visitors to peek into historic Northern Kentucky landmarks. As part of this tour, antique cars were displayed in front of the house, and in a promotional article, it was also noted that the cast iron Victorian porch on this 1852 house was an especially fine feature. Refreshments were available along the tour route, including Kentucky burgoo and tea, which was sold at George Rogers Clark Park, and this was very fitting considering its history as a restaurant and Tom Cody's specialty in burgoo. In 1998, James Stetter Owen, president of the cemetery, and his wife decided to retire, and they sold the property to the SCI Kentucky Funeral Services Corporation. A couple of generations of the Schaefer family worked as grounds foremen at the cemetery, and they cared for the scenic property. SCI continued the work of the Schaefer family, and they ensured the preservation of the picturesque setting. Then in December 2007, SCI transferred the property to Stonemore Partners, the company that currently manages the cemetery. A 1938 newspaper article referring to the Caleb Manley House and its history stated that Northern Kentucky can be assured that the fine historical spot will be a permanent place of interest to all Kentuckians. However, the home is now unoccupied and unfortunately in disrepair, and the future of the historic house remains uncertain. Thank you for joining us on this stop of our virtual history tour, and join us in 2 weeks where we will explore the history of the Metcalfe-Stephens home in Independence. If you would like assistance with researching your own historic Kenton County house, you can make a one-on-one research appointment by calling 859-962-4070 or by emailing history@kentonlibrary.org.